I grew up loving the Beatles. And that song, All You Need Is Love, I believe that to be true. That love is all you need. And then as I started to grow and mature, I realized, is that really true? All you need is love? Is that all? And then I would try to love somebody, and I really didn't know how. Or I would try to love a kid, and the kid didn't know how to receive my love. Here at Crossroads, we have 5,000 to 6,000 kids and students a week. So as you can imagine, I've seen all kinds of things. And as much as I deeply love these kids, some of them have challenging behaviors. And some of it is due to the fact that they've experienced trauma. So you may wonder, how does trauma affect a kid? So imagine this. You're driving your car, and out of nowhere, a vehicle runs a stop sign and almost hits you. Or maybe they actually do hit you. When that happens, the stress hormone cortisol is released. It makes our heart race, our palms sweat, and we become hyper-focused on one thing, and that's protecting ourselves, surviving. When kids live in fear or experience trauma, they have these same symptoms. And trauma can affect people differently. Trauma can be a one-time event, or it can happen over and over, day after day. Trauma is really anything that's messed up or scary that our brains simply can't process. So when a kid is abused or neglected, that's trauma. When kids have to go live with their grandparents because their parents have overdosed, or gone to jail, or simply can't care for them anymore, that's trauma. When children are separated from their birth parents, whether it happens in the hospital when they are born or many years later, that's trauma. But I used to look at these kids when they're challenging behaviors, and I think, what's wrong with you? You are in a safe environment now. You have parents that love you. Or I'd look at their parents, and I go, you just need to be tougher on your kid. You need to discipline them. You need to train them up. And then I got to know these kids, and I realized how wrong and judgmental I was. One little guy I met, he had a little plastic grocery bag filled with all of his treasures, which was adorable. But when he brought it to church, it was super annoying because he wouldn't share any of his things with anybody. He didn't even want the other kids to look in his bag. So of course the kids were really curious. And when they'd start to get close to the bag, he'd get angry. And sometimes he'd lash out at them physically. So one day I said to him, hey there, little buddy, how about you leave the bag at home next week? He then told me that because he had been in multiple foster homes and sometimes had to leave quickly, that he'd had treasures that were left behind that he never ever saw again. And this was a smart kid. And he said, that's not gonna happen to me again. So he got his little grocery bag and he put all of the important things in his life in this bag. That little boy, he wrecked me. Because it was through him that God called me to advocate and fight for these kids. Because this little boy, he wasn't a bad kid. He was hurt, and he was afraid, and his brain was just trying to process what was going on around him. He was scared. The most important thing to him was protecting himself and his possessions. And this little boy, he's the least of these that Jesus talks about. And what we have learned through science, when somebody lives in a state of chronic fear, like this little boy, it actually changes the architecture of our brain, that then changes our ability to cope and to think logically. Experts have also learned that the best therapeutic experiences, they don't always happen in therapy. Actually, they often happen in healthy, safe relationships. Dr. Bruce Perry is a psychiatrist who's worked with thousands of kids who've experienced trauma. And he says, The research on the most effective treatments to help child trauma victims might be accurately summed up this way. What works best is anything that increases the quality and number of relationships in the child's life. So kids are often harmed through relationship, and then it's through relationship that they can begin to heal. But I know being in a relationship with a kid who has experienced trauma is emotionally and physically exhausting. It's much easier to say, hey, you know what? There's programs and government agencies for that. I'm just going to let them handle it. But that's why God created the family and community. It's for us to handle it, because kids must be in a nurturing relationship to thrive and to heal. And that's why I am so thankful to be in a community and on a team that's passionate about reaching these kids and their family. A team that doesn't quit when it gets hard. Here at Crossroads, we have kids and students that come who are kicked out at other places, and they're welcomed here with open arms. Because the teams here, they want to create a safe environment for them to hear about a father who will never leave, to hear about a dad who knows them and has a great plan for their life. And I just want to say, if you're here and you're in that fight, well done. God is pleased with the work that you're doing. And I know it is a difficult journey. I also know that when we do this, we get to see the miracle when a kid begins to feel safe and starts to be able to receive love. I also know that God is not finished working through us to reach more of these kids. We aren't all called to care for these kids in the same way. For my family, we were called to take kids into our home and into our family 24/7. You might be feeling the nudge to do that. And maybe that's not you. And that's totally okay. When we look at, currently there are over 400,000 kids in foster care across the nation, and many more who've experienced trauma, and it can seem overwhelming. And you might be sitting there going, I can't fix that. You're right, you can't fix it. But what we can do is we can take a step towards one. I was recently talking to a young woman, and a couple weeks ago, she wasn't a mom, but she got a phone call, and she was told that there was a relative of hers that was no longer able to take care of their kids. And this brave woman said, I'll do it. I'll take her kids in. And so people kept asking her, what can I do to help? And she'd go, I don't know. Because she was a brand new mom. She had no idea what she needed. And what we could do in this situation is we can take a step towards her and mow her lawn. We can take a step towards her family and say, I'm going to bring dinner to you this week so you and your husband can take a walk or a nap. We can also, for other families that are struggling, we can take a step towards them and offer to take their kids bike riding, or burn off some energy and give mom and dad a break. Or we can be a safe, non-judgmental place for them to process their difficult emotions and experiences. We can also commit to praying for them regularly. And if we do that, let them know. Send them notes, send them texts. And every time you do this, we're making a difference. We are taking a step towards the least of these. A quote that really drives me is from Josh Shipp, who spent years in foster care as a kid. And he says, every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. And I have seen that firsthand. I have a 17-year-old that I was hanging out with recently, and she said to me, I just need somebody to remind me who I am, because sometimes I forget. So I get to tell her, you can do hard things. You are empathetic. You are beautiful. I can also remind her to clean up her social media. And I get to be a part of her life and her story. I want more people to experience that. Remember the kid with the bag that I talked about? Well, every day, his adoptive parents told him and showed him that they weren't going anywhere. And his leaders at church, they found a safe and secure place to store his treasures. And one day, he left his bag at home. And then later, the contents of his bag ended up being scattered throughout his house because he was beginning to feel safe and he knew that he was home. And his story isn't over, but because of the challenges, because of his experiences, he may always have challenges, but he now has relationships and people around him that he can count on. So you know what? Maybe the Beatles weren't that far off. Love is needed, but it's the kind of love that might introduce mess into our life. We might get hurt. We might grow in ways that we never imagined possible. And when we take a step towards that one, we can be the difference that enables that kid to be a success story. Thank you.